myself again. But it's the only way you're ever gonna learn. You look back and it's all in the past. I'm dwelling on that.
Good evening and welcome to NUFC Matters. It's Thursday night and you're joining myself, Steve Wraith, Malcolm MacDonald and John Gibson for an hour of NUFC chat and plenty to talk about as always. First and foremost, lads, I've got a message from Martin Bailey today and he says, I keep meaning to ask you this. Can you give my dad a mention on your show tonight, please? He said, Richard Bailey is his name. He's a massive fan of Malcolm's. And could you ask Malcolm if he remembers back in 1988, he used to own a pub in Worthing on the south coast in a little village called Broadwater. The pub was called the Far Post and the pub garden backed onto our back garden. My dad used to go in there for the odd pint and chat to Malcolm. Can you ask if he would give a shout out and say hello to my dad on the show tonight? Oh, Mal's frozen. He's frozen. I've read all of that out as well. Oh, for God's sake. What a start.
Funny enough, Steve, the pub you're mentioning is the pub Malcolm took over and was manager of when he did the deal. Remember, and acted as the agent for Mirandina and did the deal with Willie McFall for Newcastle to sign Mirandina. He was in the Far Post at Worthing at that time. But no doubt, after he's let the dog out and he comes back in 25 minutes, he'll tell us all about it.
Well, all the mayhem was slightly late starting the show because your phone was ringing and it wouldn't stop. And then the dog started barking and then Malcolm's frozen. But he's beaten all records tonight. He's actually gone in the first minute. Unbelievable, Jeff. Classic. Lee Taylor, anyway, he says, evening guys, Steve Bruce's odds-on favourite to be the next Premier League manager to be sacked. Why do you think, John, that Ashley and co haven't pulled the trigger on him yet?
Well, it's absolutely baffling, isn't it? I mean, it is absolutely ridiculous. There's no way he's going to pull the trigger on him this season now, because by the time the international break is over, we're into games thick and fast and they're running down far too much, unless he suddenly put Jones in charge in a blind panic 2 or 3 games from the end, which is too late. But, you know, when you think about the situation, Frank Lampard is a club legend at Chelsea, and he got peddled for an awful lot less than has happened at Newcastle. Chris Wilder is a club legend at Sheffield United, and they peddled him. Slaven Bilic won promotion for West Brom, and almost immediately at the start of this season, he got the pedal. But we've got a bloke here that in the last 20 games has managed to win 2, has in the last game produced the most pathetic, timid, and unimaginative defeat, unimaginative from the point of view of what was being done about it from the sidelines, that was possible, yet still survives. Now, if anybody can tell me the reason why that's happened, I mean, to be perfectly truthful, and all 3 of you have been banging on about it for a while, Steve, this shouldn't have happened after the Brighton game. This should have happened long ago so that any new guy had a chance of getting things organised and keeping us up. This should have happened not because of Brighton. It should have happened long before it. And the fact that it hasn't happened at all shows both his indifference, what he calls loyalty. I mean, he wants to evidently reward Steve Bruce for loyalty. Well, what does that mean? The only thing Geordies think it means is that being loyal is you don't give Ashley a lot of aggro about wanting to improve the situation, because that's what Rafa Benitez did. He would not accept the situation and he riled against the restrictions repeatedly, which didn't go down well with Ashley. Steve Bruce isn't doing that. That does go down well with Ashley. And the other excuse, well, he's a Geordie that loves the club. I mean, really, he hasn't been listening to the fans at all, because that is one of the things that riles the fans, that they believe that Steve Bruce hides behind the Geordie tag. It is quite incredible. and it's left me baffled. And quite frankly, Steve, has left me depressed, because if things aren't going to change, how the heck are we going to turn around the mess we're in time to save ourselves? The only way we're going to be saved is Fulham saving us by falling flat on their face. That's the best chance we've got, Steve.
Almost gives me the impression as well that Steve Bruce is banking on that. He just seems to be banking on the fact that Fulham aren't going to get the points, and it's a gamble.
It's a huge gamble, especially considering that our last game is away to Fulham. If they are still, supposing by some miracle the situation remains as good as it is now, we will go into the last game 2 points ahead of Fulham, which means if they win at their place on the last day, we go down. It's a heck of a gamble, both by Bruce and by Ashley, that we're going to get away with that, isn't it? And I think it's depressed everybody, fans, hacks, everybody that is still here. And perhaps the biggest condemnation and the biggest worry of the lot is it's depressed an awful lot of players as well. So what the morale's going to be like? I mean, we desperately need the 15 players, 16 players that go out for Newcastle United against Spurs to run the blood to water to give us any chance whatsoever. And it's no good 8 of them doing that, Steve, as you know, and the other 3 don't, because in a team game, you'll get beat. You're only as good as your weakest link, any team. And we need to, more than we need ability now, we need attitude. Because without the right attitude, we have got no chance. And we're not showing the right attitude enough. 2 wins out of the last 20 tell us that.
Yeah, exactly. Question there from James Brown. Those of you who are waiting for Malcolm, he was here right at the start. Internet issues, unfortunately, have taken him away. I'm sure he'll be back at some point. Chris Wilder and Graham Jones are the 2 favourites to replace Bruce. Should he be sacked from those 2 names? And from those 2 names, who would you pick, John? James would like to see Wilder.
Yes, I think I would have to go along with that as well, because I've found that the best chance you've ever got once you go past no return, and I believe that Newcastle United have now gone past no return, the point of no return. I cannot see Steve Bruce long-term being able to reverse the trend that is now going on, either with the fans, with the players, or whatever. I don't think necessarily pushing in a caretaker who's already been in the club, like Graham Jones, and asking him, when we bear in mind, without trying to tar him with the bush, while he's been successful with Belgium as number 2 to Martinez, and it would be very difficult not to be successful with them without having a go at Graham whatsoever, because they've got so many world-class players. They're the number 1 international team in the world. But when he was manager at Luton, he had a disastrous time, and you've only got to ask Rob Lee about that, because Rob Lee's son was in the Luton squad at that time, and Rob is not a fan. So you would have to go with Wilder, even though we would be talking about, would it set a record that Chris Wilder, you could then say, took 2 teams down in the 1 season, Sheffield United and Newcastle United.
Yeah, very true. Very true, John. David Reed says, my question is it too late to change manager now? Do we let things be? And things could change in the summer? Better the devil you know and all that. Good question, David. I mean, John, is it too late to change the manager now?
It's a cracking question, because 99 times out of 100, you would say, yes, it is, because you've left it far too late. A new manager is not from day one going to get the side up and running and all for one and one for all. He's running out of time to do that. And for a start, that ain't going to happen at Newcastle. If there's any change at all, it will only be Bruce out with Agnew and Clements going with him, and Jones going in as caretaker till the end of the season. That's the only possible change that I could see Ashley agreeing to at this late stage of the season. Because you're not going to get people like Rafa Benitez coming back, who knows so many of the players that he might well have had a chance if he come back to hit the ground running, but he wouldn't come back under Ashley. So the only change you're going to get, if any at all, is Jones into the job and the other three guys out of the job. It is too late. That's why I said right at the beginning, this shouldn't have happened after Brighton. This should have happened weeks ago.
Bede says, if a manager upsets the goalkeeper by dropping him, then falls out with the Longstaffs, and then has a bust up with Richie, how can this manager be classed as a good man manager? What are your thoughts on that, John?
Well, that is spot on again. You don't fool the Geordie public. Spot on again. I mean, Steve Bruce has had a reputation as a great man manager all of his managerial career. The fact that results haven't necessarily come along to substantiate that part of his makeup is totally different. But that is one of the worrying things now, that this man management thing has now become a myth. He's fallen out with Carl Darlow because you've got to read in the paper that now Steve Bruce has denied he planted the story, and of course he would, but nonetheless the story was correct. So you got that situation. The Richie situation is huge, and there's been so many others. There's obviously been something up with the Longstaffs. There's been something off specifically with Matty Longstaff. How can you go from Matty Longstaff being the guy that must stay at this club and they got him a new contract, etc., to now he can't get in the 19 that's travel on match day, and he's done nothing wrong on the pitch. In fact, I would suggest that his few performances on the pitch this season have been very good, but there's things wrong there. Richie can't get a look in because it's personal. The Longstaffs can't get a look in. Carroll can't get a look in because they won't change the style to allow a centre forward to go. Yet, do we not think that Matt Ritchie, Matty Longstaff and Carroll have a terrific attitude and terrific fight and up and atom attitude that Newcastle United desperately need in all 11 players now to have any chance of surviving? Yet for personal reasons they aren't getting a chance on the side. Will this weekend, will Bruce forgive Matt Ritchie in his heart and pick him for what went before? Will he suddenly find where Matty Longstaff's lie in self-isolating and bring him back? Will he suddenly change the tactics and play an orthodox centre forward so he can pick Carroll? He needs people with that sort of attitude. And by the way, the man's back. He's put the dog out. That's done.
Well, you wouldn't believe it, Malcolm, but I had to read you this long message, and I didn't realise you'd gone because I wasn't watching the screen. I was reading the message. So I'll read it again so you can respond to it. It was a message that we got from Martin Bailey, who does our Matchday Lives. And he said, I keep meaning to ask you to give my dad a mention on your Malcolm and Gibbo shows. His name is Richard Bailey and is a massive fan of Malcolm's. Could you ask Malcolm if he remembers back in 1988, he used to own a pub in Worthing on the south coast in a little village called Broadwater. The pub was called the Far Post and the pub garden backed onto our back garden. My dad used to go in there for the odd pint and chat to Malcolm. Can you also ask if he says, can you ask Malcolm to give him a shout out and say hello to my dad, Richard Bailey?
Yes, indeed. Hello, Richard. Well. We used to have 2 miniature goats. And the pen that I built for them was in the corner. And what I didn't quite realise when we got the goats, and and they were to sort of keep kids in the pub garden entertained, and the goats from doing a standing jump, and they were only sort of like 18 inches high, but they could spring over a 7-foot fence. This goat would just suddenly go whoop and into Richard's garden, and then when he wanted to come back, it'd just spring back over. They were amazing, but it's lovely to hear from them. We were there for 3 years, and I then left the pub and sold the business because I became the Huddersfield manager. That certainly didn't work out. Should have kept the pub. But but I certainly remember having a pint with Richard. That was absolutely lovely.
Yeah, good stuff. Good to hear from you, Martin. Thanks for that. Really nice message. Lots of questions coming in, and lots of people not just putting the blame at Steve Bruce's door. Some of them putting it at the players' door. I mean, Malcolm, give us your take on that shambles that we saw at the weekend.
Well, what your responsibility as a manager is to organise the players and pick the team in such a way where everybody can feel that they are being given the best possible opportunity in the best organised and created side. And that's not happening. Newcastle are going out with defenders who can't defend, midfielders who, in all honesty, aren't one thing nor another, and a forward line which is all higgledy-piggledy, that have scored 5 goals this season between them. So wherever you're playing, it just doesn't put any confidence within you. And there was the first Brighton goal. I think it was the first. I saw centre halves just backing off, not getting involved at all. Kieran Clark, who is just about one of the best pros in the club, one of the best, and I saw him standing off and letting the player have space, and in the end he shot and it went in. And I thought, that just isn't Kieran Clark. It isn't what he does. It isn't how he plays. So something was going on in that game that even the best pro on the pitch just had his head down and wasn't doing what was absolutely necessary of him. And I thought, well, there is a rabbit off here for sure. Now, I don't know whether it's the back four, because one of the most important things that I always felt the responsibility as a forward was get the side 1-0 up. It takes the pressure off the back four. What we've got at the moment is a back four that is never given a bit of time off. It's always under pressure. One mistake from them and the game's lost. That's the pressure that they're under. And they must have looked at the team sheet. Joe Linton, you say, well, he's out on the right wing. He's not going to do very much, is he? And the others that were selected, the back four had no belief in what was up front. The midfield played as if they were not one thing or another. They didn't support the guys who were at the front, and they didn't really get in front and put a barrier in front of the back four. So I thought the whole 11 players looked to me as if they were completely, utterly demoralised. And it was Kieran Clark. He for me was the key, because he's such a damn good pro. He and Richie, two best pros in the club for me.
Yep. I'd agree.
Yeah, and when Kieran Clark doesn't do what he always does as a defender, and he does defend well, and he wasn't doing it, and I thought there really is a rabbit off tonight, and I think the back four have got to a point where what he's choosing up front is as suicidal as I've ever seen in football. That they are not going to score, they're not going to make goals. They do well just to get into the opposing penalty area, and so I just saw a completely demoralised outfit down at Brighton, and I really had the impression that they were demoralised just simply because of the team selection. You look over at the dugout, and sitting there in the seats behind, you've got two guys who will make and score you goals in Andy Carroll. Andy Carroll, he'll cause problems in a back four, whether it'll be physical, he's got a prowess in the air, and having the right bit of support, but they're sitting on the bench, and the back four must be looking across, going, well, the goals are sitting there, sitting behind the dugout. What's going on? Why aren't we being given that chance? Mm-hmm. And so demoralisation sets in, and this has been going on for game after game after game.
Yeah,
and it's got to the stage. I was watching the Brighton game, and as soon as I saw what team it was, I just lost interest in the game, because I knew that it was going to be a no-show. That the one thing that was guaranteed was Newcastle 0 come the end of the game. And so I thought, why is this happening? Is Steve Bruce so utterly useless that he cannot pick a better side than this? Or is he picking it purposely?
Sabotage is it's a word that a lot of people are using, Mal. Do you think that's possible? Do you think that's something that he would...
It's one or the other. He's either completely and utterly lost the plot, or, yes, he's going about sabotage, and it's for his own ends, because of the clause in the contract
to get the payout
that I understand he's got for a massive payoff, should he be sacked. And I think that the players realise that was in the performance on Saturday night, that the players were utterly demoralised before the kickoff. And once they did kick off, oh my word, I thought it was absolutely appalling. Absolutely appalling. I've never seen anything quite like it. I really haven't. And Brighton couldn't believe their luck. And when you think, Brighton, for heaven's sake, so the aggregate score this season is Brighton 6, Newcastle 0. Brighton 6 points, Newcastle 0. Newcastle haven't even scored against them. Haven't in 120 minutes. In 180 minutes, haven't been able to stick the ball in the net against Brighton. So I think that there is a game going on between the owner and the manager. The manager's trying to get sacked and get paid up. I think the owner's sussed him out and isn't wanting to pay it out, and so you've got this standoff up in the office, and the lads in the dressing room, they have just got to suffer. They've got to suffer it because they're looking at the team sheet and just go, "Oh, this is ridiculous," you know. And if you don't give players a feeling of them being valued, it's a manager's duty to give every player in the side and the side in general the very best chance. And Steve Bruce isn't doing that.
Okay.
He isn't doing it. And that and to be doing it in the club that he purports to have supported as a lad, I think it's absolutely diabolical. I really do.
Let's give a big shout out to Spider VPN, who've sponsored us in February, March, and now we're going to continue in April. They're sponsoring the StreamYard application. Big thanks to the lads down there. Geordie Riffs as well, another main sponsor this month. Premium guitar lessons for beginners and children. Guitar repairs and service and recording studio. You can find them at geordieriffs.co.uk at the website. Geordie Riffs official Facebook. But please give them a follow on Instagram at Geordie Riffs. They're trying to build up their Instagram account. And also a big shout out to qtechshop.co.uk. The makers of pool tables and snooker tables in Wallsend, and Jab Signature, who are launching their new brand very, very soon, who do all of our flyers and posters. New time visitor to the channel, please subscribe, hit the Newcastle Legends logo in the bottom right hand corner, hit the thumb up to give it a like, and click share as well, which shares it to your social media. If you miss us on screen, you can catch up on your podcast provider such as iTunes and Spotify. John, how much responsibility should Jamal Lascelles be taking here, says Ross Cummin. A lot of people saying that he should really be the one who, you know, is knocking on the manager's door and telling them that the players aren't happy. And I mean, you know, the rumour had gone round after the game against Brighton that Bruce had been sacked, and it, you know, the stories coming out of the dressing room are that some of the players thought he'd already gone.
That's absolutely correct. They did, and they were surprised when they were walking onto the team coach to see that Steve Bruce was actually doing some live interviews with the television people, which told them, of course, that he hadn't gone because he was there fronting it with the press. There's several things to be said. Unquestionably, you've got to look at the manager, and he carries the major blame. And he said so himself, and I bet he wishes he hadn't, before the Brighton game when he said, I haven't been good enough and the buck stops with me. You've got to believe it. That's correct, and that's the way it is. But what does irritate me is some players, not all players, will hide behind the fact that there is a big scapegoat up there, and correctly up there, and they will stack their hand and not perform because they can hide behind, well, it's a guy's fault over there. And it's been significant this week that certain players have been called out by other pros, by top ex-players. A couple of England internationals have come out publicly and said that Ryan Fraser and Joe Linton aren't putting in a shift, and they have let Newcastle United down. Now, that is happening. There's absolutely no question about that. Lascelles on the pitch is the manager, not off the pitch, on the pitch. For an hour and a half, he's the manager. And Malcolm played with Bob Moncur. We had Alan Shearer is a skipper. Do you think those guys would be more volatile, would be more putting people up against the wall, would be more on the pitch, balling people out and making things happen than Jamal Lascelles has been doing? There's too many people hiding behind the current situation, and it's not good enough. We all know whose fault it really is. There's no question about that. But may I also bring up, guys, that what is adding to absolute, total and utter confusion at Newcastle United is what's become plainly obvious over the last few games, and that is you've got two people standing on the touchline telling the players what to do, and they've got totally different tactical philosophies. You've got Steve Bruce, who has always built his side on try not to get beat rather than try to win. And then you've got Graham Jones, who was brought up by Martinez and has been everywhere with him, who's a front foot coach who wants to play like Leeds United play, on the front foot, pressing from the front, closing down people, etc. And as good as that is, as admirable as that is, you've got to be super fit to be able to do that. Leeds don't do it by accident. Leeds do it because they've worked with the manager for 2 or 3 seasons. They do phenomenal pre-season work on fitness, and all fit as a lock and close down brilliantly. We are being asked mid-season, when we give a lot of time off to a lot of players and don't do a lot of physical work, we are being asked mid-season to close down as if you're Usain Bolt, to fit the style of play Newcastle's got. And I think there's players looking over the bench now saying, are we supposed to stick or twist? Are we playing the diamond? Am I playing on the left side or the right side? What am I supposed to do? Oh, as I remember, I'm supposed to close down. So one goes to close down when everybody's got to go to close down. The tactical situation is more and more confusing than it has ever been. And I think that is confusing the players until they're standing and looking over at the bench and saying, well, what exactly are we going to do? And I think that showed in the second half at Brighton. Each individual didn't know what he in particular should do. And because Steve Bruce has bought into Jones' system, which is the split strikers, which initially worked because it was a new idea when they got the 2 results, if you remember, Everton in particular and then Southampton at home. It worked initially because it was this lovely, good idea, etc., etc. But significantly because they had the right front three to make it work, which was Wilson, San Maximum and Almiron, who's great at closing people down because he can run all day long. He's got natural fitness. They had those 3 guys, and the system suited those 3 guys. Take those 3 guys out the equation, and we're not left with the players that suits that system. Yes, because Gale can't play that system. Gale can't play that system. Carroll can't play that system. And Fraser, for me, has been a massive disappointment. When he first come to this club, he wasn't fit enough to be able to start, not because he had an injury, but because he hadn't played at the end of last season when he opted out.
He refused.
He wasn't fit enough. Now he's playing, and his body language tells me that it's all wrong. And I think he should be pulled out, and Murphy should be given a start because Murphy has got that extra about him. But because Bruce has bought into this Jones system, for all the confusion it's causing, he won't change the system. And if you look at what happened to us at Brighton, how is it? And I know the game was already lost. But when Newcastle come to make the 3rd change as a sub and they took Almiron off, they put Sean Longstaff on. They put Sean Longstaff on when sitting on the subs bench was Gale and Carroll, who didn't go on at all, and who, by the way, at the final whistle, stormed down the tunnel into the dressing room and refused to come out to do the warm down on the pitch because they were absolutely fed up. Now, if we've got 2 out and out strikers who are supposed to be goal searchers and they can't get on the pitch when we are losing 3-0, what is the point of having them at all? What is the point in giving Carroll a contract for this season? And you may as well tell Gale and Carroll, whose contracts are now up at the end of the season, that they're leaving now. Because I tell you what, they'll want to leave.
So, Mal,
won't
Malcolm, the reward for such a sterling performance at the weekend was 6 days off out of 9. What did you make of that?
Cloughy used to get away with it, but then he was winning titles and all sorts, both domestically and internationally. But players, when they're having a problem, when things aren't going right for them, they want to get on the training field. They want to work at things. They want to work together, put things right, strengthen whatever it is they're doing. But get organised, get an understanding going. They can't do that sat at home. And it must have been not just frustrating for the players, but seriously annoying. And again, I sincerely question Steve Bruce. Why? What good was it going to do? The team is playing rubbish, and you give them 6 days off. If they're playing brilliantly, maybe you can do that, like Cloughy did. But when they are totally disorganised, you need them on the training field. And again, that's why I have this serious question mark over Bruce's tactics as to how he's going about doing his job. And I don't like it. In fact, I absolutely hate it and abhor it. I really do. And I've got deep suspicions as to what is actually going on. And it's not doing this club any good at all. It's not doing the players any good. And it's going to take a very long time after Bruce has left for a really good manager to get it all put right and to get back into good playing mode. It will take a while. It really will. And so I think all supporters, you're going to have to be pretty patient in this. It will help if we don't get relegated.
Malcolm, hand on heart now, looking at this squad, looking at Steve Bruce, and looking at the situation the club finds itself in, we've been relegated twice before under Ashley. Do you think Newcastle United are staying up, or do you think Newcastle United are going down? Newcastle
Will go down if Fulham can start to score the odd goal or two. If Fulham don't improve on their goal scoring, Newcastle have a chance of staying up. But I'm looking at the Newcastle fixture list, and I can see a possible 3 points against Sheffield United. I can't see points anywhere else in any other fixture. Whether or not the players can suddenly get themselves organised and start turning it on a bit, but I doubt it. I doubt it very much. I think there is demoralisation there within the club now in the players' dressing room. So I don't think that will happen. And I really am not looking any further than a possible 3 points from now until the end of the season.
Wow. Same question to you, John.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got to say that if we were for standing start where everybody was now equal and there was a 9-game charge to the end of the season, Newcastle wouldn't stay up. And if it's up to their own efforts, we will not stay up. I agree totally with what Malcolm said. The only way we will stay up is that Fulham cannot put together enough points to overhaul us, having got so close to it from a 10-point gap to a 1-point gap at one stage. that, like Malcolm said, the only match I can see us winning between now and the end of the season is Sheffield United. And then I remind it at home. And then I remind myself that we went to Sheffield United, who hadn't won a solitary single game all season, and they beat us. So you've got to remember that. The two things that I would say, which supports what Malcolm was saying, is that if Fulham suddenly start to discover that they can score the odd goal to win games between now and the end of the season, then we are in massive trouble. And unfortunately, we watched Mitrovic last night score 2 against the Republic of Ireland, and our 2 players who were involved in the game, Clark and Hendrick, and the chip goal was sublime. If he starts he's forgotten how to score for Fulham, and it isn't even a starter for Fulham, but he wasn't a starter last night. If he starts doing what he did last night, then Newcastle United, his old club's in big trouble. And I tell you what, on the last day of the season, when we go to Fulham, I want to be 4 points ahead of Fulham. Because if our future depends on that game, I don't at all. I want to go to Fulham having got 3 points against Sheffield United that puts us 4 ahead, and they can't do something about it. Otherwise, it's doomsday.
How big a miss is Hayden going to be, Malcolm? Obviously, he's out now for the rest of the season.
I'm not a Hayden lover, I have to admit.
I know you're not, but he's certainly played better than some in the last few weeks.
I'll give him that, and he seems to have sort of got Shelby off his back and is just ignoring him and getting on with what he's good at. Shelby doesn't do anybody wearing black and white stripes any favours out there. He wants to play the way he wants to play. He wants to be knocking glory balls 40, 50, 60 yards. He doesn't take part at all with other midfield players. He doesn't look to knock forwards in and get in there and support them. And so, yes, I suppose Hayden will be a miss because he started to just organise himself nicely in front of the centre halves and act as a shield for them. Who's going to come in place of him? I'm really not too sure, because the problem always is, how do they deal with Shelby? And it seems to me that Steve Bruce's favourite is Shelby in the side, and that and he seems to want Shelby in there all the time. Shelby does nothing for other players. He wants to go on and put a singular show on for himself, and is not prepared to offer the players around him any real support, encouragement, go and play with them. When was the last time you saw Shelby pass with the lad on loan from Arsenal?
Yeah, I know. I mean, Willock had that great debut, and then he's just disappeared into the ethos.
Yeah, because Shelby saw what was going on and went, "Whoa, I'm not going to support him in
You've talked about this. You've talked about this when we've done talk-ins pre-match, Malcolm, many times now. And only a professional footballer or former professional footballer really can say that goes on. But you've said this to me, that some players, if they have their nose pushed out to joint, deliberately make other players look bad.
Yeah. Yes. I had one when I was a manager, and you're best to move them on. I don't think that Steve Bruce is recognising what Shelby actually does out in the field, and and is relying on him as because Shelby can make himself look good. He doesn't make anybody else look good, though. That's the problem. And as a midfield player, what you want is a midfield player grafting away, making stuff for forwards, making the forwards look good. And how do forwards look good? Sticking it in the net.
Yeah.
But he's not playing any of those kind of balls. He wants to sit in front of the centre halves and go, bing, 60 yards away. And he's
World Cup balls.
Yeah. And he has nothing to do with Willock. Hayden's had a hell of a battle. Sean Longstaff, his nightmare is being sent on the pitch to go and play in the middle of the park with Shelby there. That is his all-time nightmare. His younger brother, he does it. He sort of gets away from it a little bit, and sort of shrugs it off and says, "Right, I'll go and play with other players." But Sean Longstaff, he finds when he's on the ball, Shelby a real problem, And I've watched poor old Sean's levels just dropping, and I don't know whether you noticed his face when he was being brought on as a substitute. He looked pained.
Yeah, he did.
Really pained. And I thought, oh, bless you. You're just not looking forward to this at all. You know, usually subs, come on, I can't get on quick enough. Sean wasn't like that. And I think that's all down to Shelby.
Paul Oxley says you're right. He's obviously making Joe Linton look bad. He wants to know why.
I'm waiting to see who will make him look good, Steve. if I may, just a little bit, very quickly on the Hayden situation. I'll tell you one of the reasons why we'll miss Hayden is because his attitude's right. I was talking very early on about people like Joe Linton and Fraser and how we were going to have to rely on the Richies and Matty Longstaffs, etc., etc. Hayden, his attitude is right. And Malcolm was saying we've got to wait and see who comes in for him as well. Well, for me, the person that ought to come in is Matty Longstaff, and the person that will come in is Jeff Hendrick. And that's a double reason why we'll miss Hayden, not just because of his attitude, but because of who will replace him.
Do you know, I saw a stat. It was the last time that Hendrick played. And the stat had him, he ran the 5th greatest distance of anybody on the pitch. Yeah, there were just 4 in front of him. His running was phenomenal. The problem was he kept running away. He goes away from the play. He doesn't look to get in and take part. And for all this running, he had so few touches, it was ridiculous. And all I can conclude from that is that he runs away from stuff. And he isn't looking to get into the game at all. And so, and I don't think that Steve Bruce, I don't think he sees any of this. Or is he putting players into situations knowing that it'll all go wrong?
Blue Moon Boy says, Malcolm, do you see Jones as part of the problem? Is Jones part of the problem? We had that little bounce 2 games. A lot of people, including me, you know, you do get carried away saying, you know, it's Indiana Jones come to save the day. But in reality, what I saw at the weekend was too many cooks spoiling the broth. I saw Steve Bruce trying to give substitutes instructions and Graham Jones talking over the top of him. It looked like an absolute car crash on the sideline.
Yeah, but I think that Jones has probably got the ability to do it, but I'm not so sure that it's suiting Steve Bruce at all. I really don't. The body language between those two guys is absolutely frozen. It is seriously cold between them. There's no real communication at all. Jones is he's looking to get there and talk with players, instruct them, whatever. If you notice that Steve Bruce's two coaches say nothing. They now and again maybe have a little word with Steve Bruce, but it's not very much through a 90-minute match. Not very much at all. They certainly don't get involved with the players on the field. They just stay back, and I think that's how Steve Bruce likes it. And what Jones is doing doesn't suit Steve Bruce at all. And there are just times when I've seen glances from Bruce towards Jones that I don't like at all. Don't like. So who knows? I don't know. Is it because Jones is saying the wrong thing as far as Bruce is concerned, or is it that he's actually talking to players on the pitch and Bruce doesn't like that? And Bruce doesn't talk very much to players on the pitch. Not very much at all. And it's one of the quietest benches that I've ever known. Coaches, the coach part of it. And in the situation that Newcastle find themselves, you would think that they'd all be wanting to get out there and put things right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you would do. This is a great question, John. Billy Gaddis says, one serious question, gentlemen. How do you motivate millionaire footballers who can leave the club for greener pastures at the end of the season? Great question.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. That is one of the problems. And that you really then, Steve, come down and drag it all the way back to recruitment. And if you listen to Brendan Rodgers when he was talking about the Leicester recruitment, which has been top of the range, by the way, of recent times, the buy-in brilliantly, etc., etc. One of the first things you look at, it's obvious you look at ability, that is obvious, but you look at character. You look at people that have got the right attitude, that have pride in themselves and in the club, and you buy people who are right. It doesn't matter if you have the best ability in the world, if you've got the worst attitude and you're ready to stack your hand because the wind's blowing in the wrong direction, or you got out the wrong side of the bed this morning. So the way to do it is you've got to look, but we've got to look at recruitment to start with, because regardless of whether we look at whether people have got the right attitude, are we looking at people that's got the right ability? When you think of Joe Linton, when you think of Jeff Hendrick, when you think, bless him, although he might have a chance with age of Jamal Lewis, I mean, you've got Joe Linton, the record buy, who's a disaster. You've got Lewis and Hendrick, who was bought in the summer to improve the side and can't even get a start in a shockingly bad side. And you've got Fraser, who now he's in the side. Pros are openly saying his body language is ridiculous and he's down in tools. So never mind the mental thing you've got to look at to be able to get stuff out of them. We haven't even got the ability right. On a lot of them, yes, you will have the exceptions like Callum Wilson, etc., etc. But really were getting it wrong right from source. And the only chance you've got at this stage is somebody that can get the players on side. And the big thing about the Jones, which is going back to what we're talking about, the Jones and Bruce situation, is that whoever appointed him, and I'm certain the suggestion was not Bruce's to start with, did they appoint him because he is a guy that has done well with Belgium and with Roberto on Everton, etc., etc. Oh, and he's a Geordie, so he'll care. But you're putting together two total different philosophies and saying they've got to work together. The guy that wants to play on the front foot and press all the time high up the field, and the guy that wants make certain we don't lose rather than we win. You put them together. Now, Steve Bruce has had to accept Jones coming into the system, and to prove that he has accepted it, has accepted the tactical formation, the split strikers, etc., and the diamond. He's taken the formation, but the confusing message on match day and presumably Monday to Friday between two totally different philosophies is not going to work. You've either got to have a defensive coach, and that's the way a team's going to play, or an offensive coach. You can't have them both in the same camp, because the message going out to the players, they don't know whether it's stick or twist. They don't know whether to do what the head coach is asking or what the assistant coach is asking.
Yeah, I've got to obviously start drawing the show to an end, lads. But I did want to leave enough time at the end for you to pay your respects and perhaps tell a story about the late great Frank Worthington. The football lost another star, and I'm sure you probably both have a story to tell about Frank Worthington. You, John, from the press box, and Malcolm, perhaps you from the pitch. So, Malcolm, you're giggling. Have you got any stories about Frank Worthington?
Steve, I roomed with him. For
Now, I didn't know this. So this is great. Go on. Keep it clean.
On about 3 occasions, 3 England internationals. And I can honestly say I have never, ever seen a bird puller to match Frank Worthington. He was quite unreal.
Gibbo's shaking his head like he disagrees, I think.
Oh, dear.
No,
me.
I couldn't agree more.
But also, when he wasn't talking about his pulling exploits, he'd just be humming and singing Elvis Presley all the time. If he could choose to be anybody, he would be Elvis Presley. He was an absolute Presley nutcase, and went over so many times. Just to visit Elvis's house, which has now almost become an Elvis Presley museum, but in all of that, as a footballer, he was a complete one-off, total one-off. He had skills and abilities that could match the Rodney Marshes and the George Bests and what have you, but it was a different build from Bestie that he had, but he was prepared to do the outrageous on a football field, and it would come off. And for that, I just absolutely love the fella. I really did. I have had some of the funniest days of my life just being in his company, and it's very sad to see him go. He was at St James Park I suppose about 5-6 years ago, and he'd been speaking at a dinner there, and I went over and we just had a lovely, lovely time. I could tell then that his memory was starting to go, bless him. And finally, it got the better of him. But he has left, I think, absolutely great moments to any youngsters or anybody who has never really watched Frank Worthington that much. Get on YouTube, watch everything, because he was a footballer who had so much ability and incredible control of the ball. He could have been in a circus. He really could. Absolutely phenomenal guy.
If you get onto ITV Hub, the Big Match Live is often on there, and Frank Worthington features on that quite a bit.
Yes.
Brilliant to watch.
John, outrageous goals. He did. He was terrific.
For a tall, lanky guy as well. You know what I mean? Scored some wonderful goals.
Yeah.
John, yes. What was your memories of Frank Worthington? What will you remember him by?
Yeah, twofold really, player and as a person. I worked a lot with him on the talking circuit after he'd finished playing, and he was fabulous entertainment. I mean, all the girls loved him, and all the guys wanted to be him. So he had everybody eating out of his hand. And he's the only bloke I know that loved Elvis more than I loved Elvis, and he really, really did. All he did was go around every, the Elvis lookalike shows, where everybody turns up and they're dressed like Elvis and they act like Elvis. He used to go to all those dues and take a load of old players with him, and he was better than the impersonators. He would get up on stage and sing all the Elvis songs, and he did them with so much panache that he was a million times better than all the impersonators. And I think if he could have been anybody in life, as Malcolm said, it would have been Elvis Presley more than a footballer. But his ability as a footballer was quite phenomenal. And, he missed the greatest club stage in the world for himself because he was supposed to go and sign for Liverpool, and the deal was done with Liverpool when Bill Shankly was the manager, and he went to Liverpool and he had his medical, and it showed, surprise, surprise, that he had high blood pressure. So Shanks said, look, I tell you what to do, because Shanks was so keen on signing him, he didn't want to give up on him. He said, go away for a fortnight and have a little, go to Mallorca and lie in the sun and just relax and down out and come back here and you'll just dolly your medical. Now, that is the most worst thing you could do to Worthy is to send him to Mallorca, because he set world record for girls out there. He didn't relax for 1 second. He went to bed to go to sleep twice, and he'd come back and all his stats were worse than before he went away. And so the move was off and he never got there. But yet he entertained us all for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
Dementia come quite early and for a long time, as Malcolm was saying. And that's a great tragedy because it's a wicked, awful illness. But nothing, what happens when you get superstars that pass away is that your heart sinks, but your memories soar, because you've got terrible heartache and you've got great joy. You're laughing and you're sad at exactly the same time through memories, and that's what Frank Worthington did. And Elvis better move sideways upstairs because there's somebody coming in that's as good as he was.
I missed this one as well, lads, and obviously people in the chat. But Peter Lorimer, I hadn't realised he'd passed away as well. Another player who shared the pictures with you, Malcolm, back in the day. I mean, memories of Peter Lorimer.
Oh yes, he had the most phenomenal shooting ability. He had one of the one of the most powerful shots of anybody in the game, and he was a really lovely bloke, you know, and he'd always come and have a beer after the game and just come and mingle and have a little chat and find, you know, just see how you're going, and a lovely guy, he really was. But hey, what a player, you know. And when you think of that, how powerful that lead side was, and Peter Lorimer was hugely responsible for that, with the wing play, his crosses, and coming inside and shooting.
Yeah. John, I mean, you'll have seen Peter Lorimer play as well, I would imagine.
Oh, very much so. And I did work with him on the talking circuit as well. A very, very different man as a person to Worthy. He didn't live his life like Worthy, but then again, not many people did. But a phenomenal goal scorer. He was officially recorded as the hardest shot in football, over 90 miles an hour. He is Leeds' leading goal scorer of all time, like Shearer is at Newcastle. 80-odd more goals than John Charles, who's second. And as Malcolm knows, that is phenomenal because this guy wasn't a striker. He was a winger who occasionally played midfield. He wasn't an out-and-out through the middle striker, and yet he was the leading goal scorer at Leeds and played in a phenomenal Leeds side that wasn't necessarily loved by the world because it had a bit of steel in it that a lot of people disliked, and a bit of a manager that people definitely didn't like, which was Don Remy. But they were hugely successful, and Lorimer was the really good side of Leeds United. And the tragedy is, just to leave the thought, that this season Leeds United who have got devoted fans as we have, has come back to the top table after donkey's years in exile. And the great tragedy is, in the first season back in the top division, they've lost 4 of their legends in Big Jack Charlton and Norman Hunter, who are both Geordies, Trevor Cherry, and now Peter Lorimer. And that is a massive hole in the whole history of Leeds for them all to go, ironically, in the season when Leeds come back the big time. But wonderful memories of Lorimer and wonderful memories of Worthy, even though the memories are very, very different.
Great stuff, lads, and thanks to those in the chat who pointed out that Peter Lorimer had passed away. It's always good to hear Malcolm and John's memories on players gone by, even if they didn't pull on a black and white shirt. It's great to be able to hear some stories, and our thoughts, of course, at NUFC matters with their families in this sad time. Malcolm, John, have a great weekend, and I'm sure you will, because there's no Newcastle game to spoil it.
Yeah, that's right.
This will be the first weekend in an awful long time when Newcastle haven't lost.
It will. Lads, have a good weekend. I look forward to catching up with you next Thursday when we start looking ahead to some more doom and gloom. But until then, have a great week, lads, and stay safe.
God bless. All the best. Cheers, Malcolm. Cheers, Steve.
Bye, everyone.
Talking to myself again, but it's the only way you're ever gonna learn. You look back and it's all in the past.